in a lot of ways, I mean, what you were doing was uncharted territory. There was no real precedent for producing that kind of music when it came out. So, and then like with Anthrax especially, you did their debut record, you did Armed and Dangerous, and you did Spreading the Disease. So you had some time with them. You got to witness the evolution. Describe that evolution of Anthrax from Fistful of Metal to Spreading the Disease. How did the chemistry between you as the producer and the band change, and how did the band's songwriting change, if it did at all? Just kind of walk us through, because you spent a good bit of time with Anthrax, 3 releases.
Well, that's a good question. When Anthrax came in, I was really impressed with them. They reminded me of myself, of me, and of David when we started. They were very driven. They were very focused. They were all business. And they were very goal-oriented. And so I love that. Excuse me. I love that about them. I'm getting hiccups here. Sorry. But the dynamic was very different. They were finding their way. When we started, Scott and Danny, and I know it wasn't a popular decision at the time. I think it was a little like, people are a little noses out of joint. But it was clear to me that Scott Ian was the god on rhythm guitar. That Danny Spitz should not play rhythm guitar if we're going to make a tight record. So I had to make that call.
Mm-hmm.
But Danny, to his credit, was such a great lead guitarist. And so Danny and I had a great connection, and we would work, and he would do his solos, and we'd finish the solo, and he'd look at me and go, okay, just do it again. We got such a symbiotic relationship that we didn't even have to communicate after a while. But Scott was the guy. And so we basically divvied up the parts, and that was huge to the rhythmic, because Charlie and Scott, super tight together. Charlie wrote a lot of the material, still does probably, on guitar. So that was a case of that. So that first album, Dan Lilker, we played a show in Chicago with them a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But Dan was a tall guy, comes up to me. He goes, I want to talk to you. And I'm sitting down on this low bench. I'm sitting down, and I want to talk to you. As he leans over, and I thought, oh shit, man, he's going to chew me out. Like, you bastard. I hated working with you. You were the worst. And he says to me, and he's such a soft-spoken, sweet guy. But, at first I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. And he goes, I have to thank you so much. You changed my whole playing. You told me I needed to learn to play with a pick if I'm going to play this fast music. And he goes, it totally changed everything for me. I can't thank you enough. I was like, okay, dodged a bullet. But yeah, so sweet. But anyway, so that first album, it took a long time. Neil got shorted on his time for vocals, but he still came through. And Neil and I are good friends, and I've apologized 100 times about that. But Neil is so great. He's a great singer, and I'm glad he's doing so well. He deserves it. But when they came back for Armed and Dangerous, they brought in a new singer. Now, we did pre-production. I'm trying to think where. Brooklyn, maybe? Long Island? And so we get to the studio, and after about a week, now remember, Frankie is now the bass player, and Frankie was inexperienced, which he, was very nice. He's very kind. He said, that I gave him a shot and, helped him calm down. But, I tried to work with Frankie. It's very under a microscope in the studio. And when you haven't played, suddenly every little thing that you hit too hard, you're going to hear a pop on your string, or that, it's so under the microscope to get that technique, which you've been playing live, you just never really had an issue with it. But when he came back in, they had another singer. The dynamic was changing. Obviously, the shifting of the guard with Scott and Charlie really assuming control of the band. So there was a little bit of that going on. But after a week in the studio with the singer, who was a nice guy and, a good singer, went on, I think he sang with, I can't think of the name now, with Snake Sable. I'm trying to think of.
Oh, Skid Row.
Yeah, thank
Skid
you,
Row, yeah.
Skid Row. But so after a week, I said to the band, this guy's not going to get you to a major label. And that's what we were trying to do. That was the goal, to get them from indie Megaforce to a major label. So these guys, without missing a beat, they said, get Johnny on the phone. So I go to the conference room. I called John. I said, John, I don't think this is the singer for the band. He goes, okay, let me talk to the band. So the guys all go in. Not 5 minutes later, 3 minutes later, they come back in. John wants to talk to you. I go, hey, Johnny, what's up? He goes, put him on a bus. And he hung up the phone.
Wow.
So now here I am in the studio with the band, no singer. And I got to tell this kid, bye, thank you, goodbye. And like, thanks a lot, John. But, he'd already hung up. And by that time, John and I were good friends. And, so I got it. I understood John.
This is Johnny Zazula, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Zazula, right.
Okay.
Rest in peace. Such a great guy. He and Marcia, just great people. So anyway, I started looking around, and my friend Andrew Duck McDonald, I call him, I go, Duck, Anthrax has no singer, so we need to find a singer for them. And he mentions a couple singers, and one is Joey Belladonna. So I called Joey. I asked him to come in, and he agreed. And so he comes in, and the guys in Anthrax are behind the door. There's a door that looks out on the studio, but you could kind of open it a crack and see the studio. So they're all behind that door. And so John and I are working with Joey, and he was nailing it. But again, for him, the tempo, the changes, all foreign to him. It took him a while to get it. It was, people weren't, as you mentioned before, this was a new era. This was the changing of the guard. And this was music that not a lot of people were familiar with and comfortable with. And so Joey grasped it quickly, but it didn't happen immediately. Right. But they knew right away. And within singing through, we got them through a song maybe in half hour, and it was like they came bursting through the door, and like, that's it, he's the singer.
Do you recall what song that might have been? It was something on Armed and Dangerous, right?
It's Armed and Dangerous, and no, I don't. I have to think about what song it was.
Just the metal nerd in me just wants to know. So
yeah. No, I mean, I have to think about it, but I'm sure it'll come to me.
Pretty cool moment.
The metal nerd in me wants to know who the guy was that went on to Skid Row.
Uh-oh. I try not to talk dirt because he was young. He was partying a little bit. He was, his name was Matt Fallon. Yeah. And he's a great singer, Okay. I actually have tapes. I have recordings of Matt with Anthrax.
Wow.
So at some point, who knows, maybe they'll see the light of day. Certainly interesting for the hardcore fans.
So you did all that work with Anthrax, and then obviously there's some buzz starting to build because Among the Living was their next album, and of course that one was huge for them. And I believe Eddie Kramer did that record. So did you still have the desire to continue working with Anthrax at that point, and a label was saying, no, we got to go with somebody else, or was it just naturally time for you to kind of go focus on something else, and they went the direction they went? I'm curious to know why you didn't.
I think that's an interesting question and a fair one. I think there are a lot of reasons, and one is, remember back then, Eddie Kramer was a huge name, and back then a huge name. Today it means nothing. It means nothing at all. Like, oh, it's produced by so and so, everybody yawns, like nobody cares. Big name producer. Nobody's going to play you on radio. Nobody cares because of that. But back then, it gave you credibility. Mm-hmm. And Johnny was thrilled that he was now at a different echelon where now he's being taken seriously by the majors.
Yeah.
And so everybody wants that name producer because there's always that mystery about what producers do. So they're going to produce an album that's going to take you to the next level and make it the best album. And I think toward the end, for some reason, I've been good with everybody, all the guys, but Scott and I really haven't spoken. And Scott seemed to have an issue with me. Whatever it was, I had no clue. I mean, I was paying their per diems. I have a book called The Not Book, as Scott wrote on it. and they would sign. I would pay them out of my own pocket. Johnny didn't have money. I paid several $1,000s to keep them fed, and they would sign. After a while, they have to sign for the money, and they would sign like Mickey Mouse and Mousy Tongue and like crazy names after a while. But for some reason, Scott was not. Just didn't care for me. I don't know. For some reason, there was no formal falling out. But I think with Scott, that's not how he works. He wouldn't confront you or try to talk it out. So whatever it's been, I've kept my mouth shut. In fact, this is the first time I've ever even mentioned that in 40 years or whatever it is. But the other guys and I are great. And, so that's what it was. But sometimes I think when you work with, we had a great synergistic relationship on spreading the disease. And that's why that album resonates with the fans, I think, because we're all pulling together and we had such a good chemistry at that point. So doing another album, would it have been better? Better studio, better engineer, better engineer, more experienced engineer. But would it have made a better album? I don't know. Maybe Eddie Kramer made the best album. It was certainly successful. And all the machinery was in place. The machinations were there.
Yeah.
So,
well, you had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, you kind of teed it up,
I give you a lot of credit to basically helping them put Anthrax song formation and style and sound together. I mean, not you by yourself. I mean,
working with the band.
Yeah, and your communicative skills in the studio, I believe, helped them see and hear the way that Among the Living came out.
Mm-hmm. And back to, you made a point earlier, and for me, getting into it, like when I got into it, I started playing guitar about 6 months after I started playing drums. And, but I'd always had an affinity for arrangements. So it was something that every band I was in, I would always be the guy to help with arrangements and come up with ideas. And that's how I got into songwriting, by writing horrible songs, but they probably had decent arrangements. They're just horrible songs.
Right.
So
I get it.
But, for me, that was the, I was always been kind of lean toward that. And I love working with lead vocals and I love working with guitar phrasing. And so